There is so much pain and suffering and grief in the world. Just listening to the prayers of the people now, there is so much pain and suffering and grief in our community, Calvary. Do you feel it? I have to admit, at certain seasons in the life of our congregation together, I feel the weight of this pain in different ways. Waking up this morning to hear the news about John Smith was a hard one for many of us, as John and Mildred are beloved members of this community. I think about those who are in rehab and chronic situations, who are hurting with no cure or end in sight, who have been through the ringer, so to speak, who struggle to see the light. And of course, all the pain that many of us might walk around with that lives behind the surface, behind our eyes. Maybe sometimes people can catch a glimpse or hear it in the tenor or timbre of our voice that shifts. This is the world we live in because this is the life we live. Suffering is part of life. The Savior of the world suffered. We are never guaranteed that life will not be suffering. In fact, quite the contrary is true. The question is, how do we live in this pain that sometimes seems to bind us, right? To keep us down, to keep us from lifting our eyes to God's glory and power and healing. It keeps us from having hope. In the midst of all that was going on here in our community at Calvary, I had a very interesting juxtaposition of life this week. Thinking about the physical healing that we all long for as humans, as I walked around a giant pet expo called Super Zoo. Did you know this existed? I didn't either until a couple months ago. Some of you know my husband has started a company in the pet industry, so this was our first Super Zoo. 1,800 pet industry exhibitors, 4 days of educational seminars, grooming competitions, new product showcases. It was a sight to behold, unlike anything I've ever experienced. This totally was better than any church conference I've ever been to. I'm just saying. The freebies, the giveaways, the poodles that were tie-dyed. I mean, it was amazing. I could tell you stories all day about Super Zoo, none of which have anything to do with this sermon, so I won't. I will say, in case you had any doubt, people love their pets in this country. The pet industry is growing, and we were reminded by many other business owners that the pet industry is recession-proof. Because even when times are hard, people will prioritize their pets. They will spend money on their beloved animals, and they will cut other things out of their lives. Now, this is a great thing if you're in the pet industry, and it's a beautiful thing for our animal companions. And at the same time, as a pastor who was kind of just taking a peek into this world, right, on the sidelines, it was a sad reality to me because of how we treat our fellow humans, right? Whether we're in good financial times or bad financial times, we struggle to care for one another, feed one another, shelter one another, protect one another, respect one another. And here I am at a pet expo that has all of the latest and greatest nutrition and health treats and dog food and yada, yada, yada for your animal. I love animals. I love Deacon. We need to care for our animals, and there are many animals in need in our country and the world. And there are many more people in need in our country and the world. You can just walk around the streets of Vegas and see that. That's right, Las Vegas. That is where Super Zoo was held. Another first for this pastor, never been to Vegas before. Since we were in Vegas, Damon and I thought we might have a night free to go see a show, maybe Cirque du Soleil or something. Alas, we did not have time. The expo was way more intense than we thought. However, we did walk up and down the main boulevard, the last night, saw the water show in front of the Bellagio and all of that. And I noticed the booths that were along the street selling tickets for all the shows that we were not seeing. Now, of course, these street booths are all about the discount tickets. And what struck me was a significant price drop for what was called a partial view or an obstructed view or a limited view ticket. I see some of you nodding. If you go see Broadway shows or really are into the arts at all, you know about these tickets. Similar to any ticket that you might get at a show, they discount the price because they say, well, you're going to be under the mezzanine and you can't see everything up high, or you're along the sides of the orchestra and you're going to have to crane your neck behind a pole and you're not going to see everything. Or in the case of Vegas, I'm sure if it's a Cirque du Soleil thing, there's apparatuses that might be in your way and you can't see the whole show in full view, so you get the discounted price. Now, some modern theaters are built to guarantee that there are no restricted or partial views because they are in the round. However, I will say that no guarantee can guarantee whether or not the person in front of you is 6'7" or 5'1". Now, a lot of people are resistant to buy these tickets because they don't want a partial view, right? We want the full view of a show, but it can be a good financial move. The trick is, a lot of times they'll tell you exactly what will be obstructing your view, what you might miss, and you can make the decision from there. If only life was like this, right? If only we could know what was obstructing our view and perhaps pay a higher price to not have that obstruction in our way. But that's not how life works, is it? The truth is, vision is really a subjective thing. How we see the world is how we experience the world, for better or worse. And some of us feel like we have been given a partial view or obstructed view ticket on life. We've been dealt a bad hand, and we have to play the cards we've been dealt. We all know that. But we look at someone else's life longingly, thinking that the grass is greener where they are sitting. The truth is, the grass may look greener where they are, but we have no idea what might be obstructing their view. Every one of us suffers, and every one of us has limitations. And every one of us has blessings in our midst. Many, many times, we cannot control our circumstances. Most, if not all times, we can control our perspective, our view. Now, today's text in Luke's gospel invites us to look at our own lives and how we think about things like the law, how we think about things like suffering and griefs and ailments, how we see God and ourselves in the mix. The good news is, if in diving into this text the next just few minutes, we see that our vision needs to be corrected, it can be, much like popping in contact lenses or undergoing cataract surgery or even putting on some readers to make things a little bit more focused. I believe in the depths of my being that our spiritual sight can be changed. That we may remain emotionally ill or physically ill, but that wholeness can come when we see differently spiritually. When we see the world how Jesus sees it, and when we see ourselves how Jesus sees us, as whole beings, and as part of a greater whole that makes up God's creation. There's two main players in Luke's text beyond Jesus, and they both have a partial view ticket on life, if you will, but their views are obstructed for very different reasons. The woman, we know a little bit about her, that she is crippled or she is bent over because of some kind of demonic experience or force. We're not sure. We're left with a lot more questions than answers in this text. Jesus simply names that she has this condition of some sort. And whatever it is keeping her bent over. It is blocking her view except for the ground. It could be that she's been abused or oppressed. It could be that her backbone is literally broken or her vertebrae are crumbling. Whatever the infirmity, she cannot stand on her own accord. She cannot walk upright. She cannot meet the gaze of those in her community or who are around her. She most definitely has probably suffered a lack of human dignity in this and a lack of connection to community for 18 years. She is, I imagine, a faithful, law-abiding member of this synagogue community. After all, she is right there on the Sabbath, worshiping with her community, and I'm going to assume that this was the norm, not the exception, that she probably came to worship all the time with her community. And on that day, you'll notice that she did not seek out Jesus. Jesus saw her, called to her and said, "Woman, you are healed from your ailment." And she stood up straight and started praising God. She didn't go to synagogue that day expecting to be healed. She went either out of devotion to God or the community or a sense of religious obligation or some combination of the above, but she was there and Jesus was there, and for whatever reason, which we will never know why, Jesus sees her and heals her. Why her? Why not the man next to her who had an ailment that perhaps couldn't be seen? We don't know. I wish I could tell you I knew. Why her and not him or you or your loved one? I don't know why her. Whatever was causing her pain or bondage, whatever that was, Jesus saw and sought to bring healing, not just to her, though, to the whole community. We can speculate all we want about this woman, but we don't know the fullness of her conditions. And, even when we know our own medical diagnosis, we really don't even know all the factors that contribute to it, right? Science is great. Modern medicine is amazing. But there is so much mystery in our human bodies and in medicine that often we're left with questions about why is this happening to me? And what is the best treatment path forward? And why am I plateauing? Or why am I going downhill? Or why am I getting better? We don't know. That is the mystery of the physical body. But here she is, and she's healed from Jesus on this day. And before I make the main point of this sermon, I just want to pause here and say that there is a significant point to be made just in this moment. We never know when or how or through whom or where healing will take place. 18 years this woman had walked through the narthex of her synagogue and sat in a pew, and nothing had ever happened, and on this day, healing happened. We could be angry about this, we could question this and wonder, why not me or my loved one? We can also look at this story and see hope and mystery and say that healing may still come yet for those who have yet to experience healing. And we have to believe that as a community of faith. And healing may look differently than we think it's going to look. Honestly, all we know about this woman is that she stood up straight that day. She may still have been in pain. We don't know that. All we know is that she stood up straight and she was able to meet the gaze of her community around her. If it were me, God knows I would have needed a lot of therapy to get through 18 years of having been bent over and now can see and processing all of that, so we don't even know the emotional pain she was still in as well. We don't know what exactly was healed or wasn't, but we do know the effect it had on the community because people paid attention, and when she started praising God, they started praising God too. And the synagogue leader is the second interesting person in this story, who we have a lesson to learn from as well. He's not uncomfortable because Jesus healed someone. He's uncomfortable because of the day on which Jesus healed someone, which was the Sabbath. Healing was seen as work, and you're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. It's as clear as day in the Torah and the law. This is scripture, right? He had a partial view or an obstructed view of life, we could say, just as the woman did, but in a different way. Hers was due to her physical ailment. His partial view was due to his spiritual blindness, or you could say his hyper-focus on the legality of how he defined Sabbath. Now, to be fair, the synagogue leader has a reason to say this because it is the law. You're not supposed to work on the Sabbath. It was supposed to be a day of delight and enjoyment and rest. And you know, the commandments are given 2 times in Scripture, once in Exodus 20 and again in Deuteronomy 5. It's almost the exact same list, except for the commandment about Sabbath. In Exodus 20, Sabbath is framed in the context of creation, right? God created 6 days and then God rested on the Sabbath. So you have this idea of rest, and that's why we need the Sabbath. In Deuteronomy 5, the practice of Sabbath is grounded in redemption and liberation and communal liberation. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt and that the Lord your God led you out of bondage. For people who were forced to work every day, Sabbath then became this respite for them and their animals to set aside a day where they could just be in God's presence. Sabbath has something to do both with creation and liberation, with rest and redemption. And we see in the Isaiah text this prophetic witness from Isaiah. In this moment in Israelites' history, they're back from the Babylonian exile, and their life as a community is in shambles. Wealth has got the best of them. The elite are in power and are not treating those who are beneath them nicely at all. Systems are corrupt. They have a deep fear of foreigners, and you can understand that after being in captivity, but it has gone to a new extreme. And what do we hear in Isaiah but these words about, if you want me to be with you and to heal your community, do these things, right? Offer your food to the hungry, satisfy the needs of the afflicted, then your light will shine in the darkness. He goes through this litany of how we are to be present with one another in community, how the community is supposed to care for one another and heal one another. And until they do that, they're going to keep falling apart. There are a lot of things I could say about physical healing in this sermon. But the thing that struck me today, especially reading the Isaiah text, along with Luke 13 and how Jesus pushes the boundary on what is law and when love needs to rise above law, is just this question. What role does Sabbath play in our healing? I imagine you've thought about the need for rest in your life, right? It's a very hip thing to think about, right? Yoga and breathing and natural foods and getting enough sleep. That's crucial to our physical and emotional well-being. How about thinking about this aspect, though, not just of rest of Sabbath, but the liberation of Sabbath? And how is the idea of communal liberation part of our own individual healing? What role does it play? We can't untangle those two things in this text from Luke. They are tied together. Jesus is making a clear statement to the synagogue leaders that in this case, he's not throwing out the law, but he's saying grace and love win, right? He even points out that the donkey is able to get water because way back when the people thought, well, we can't let our animals be thirsty on the Sabbath, so we'll create a provision for them to be able to get water, so it's okay for us to take them to the trough. So that does not count as work, but no provision had been created to help human beings. It was like a peek into the pet expo, the super zoo right there, right? They had cared for their donkeys, but not for the humans. I invite us to think today about this. What laws or beliefs or rules in our life, even ways of thinking, keep us from having a full view the way Jesus sees the world? All of us are sitting here with an obstructed ticket in life, right? Obstructed view. We have a partial view. We are not seeing the fullness of God's belovedness and creation around us. Today we're asked to think about what is it that's keeping us from seeing that view? Is it a law? Is it an opinion, a belief, a way of being? How might God's love be calling us to a greater vision? We are bound by pain at times, but we can be freed by God's love and grace. It's as if in this story, Jesus is healing this woman and saying, look, it may be the Sabbath, but she is hurting, and here you all are, able to help her. I wonder how many other people in the room that day needed healing that perhaps didn't need to come miraculously, but could come from a fellow community member. And how many people weren't receiving that healing because of the law of the Sabbath? How is liberation of the community tied to our own individual healing and hope?